The courtroom was meant to be a classroom, a place where young minds sharpened their reasoning skills, where students played at being lawyers, judges, and jurors. But as 16-year-old Nathan Cross stepped up to the defense table, the air in the room shifted. Something was different. This wasn't just a game anymore. Nathan adjusted his tie, a cheap, borrowed one from his dad, and looked across the room. On the other side, Preston and Carter LLP, one of the most powerful law firms in the state, sat comfortably behind their polished mahogany table. This was supposed to be a simple mentorship program, a friendly mock trial where the students learned from real attorneys. But Nathan had done his homework, and something about the firm's case files didn't add up. The judge for the mock trial, Judge Ellen Monroe, sat with mild amusement, watching as the court was called to order. This was supposed to be an exercise, nothing more. Nathan, however, wasn't treating it that way. His opponent, David Lansing, a smug junior associate from Preston and Carter, barely acknowledged him. "Try not to embarrass yourself, kid," he muttered under his breath. Nathan just smiled, because in a few minutes David would be the one sweating. The bailiff, another student, called the courtroom to order. "This is the case of Preston and Carter LLP v. Calhoun Industries. The prosecution may begin." Lansing stood confidently, striding to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "today we will demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that Calhoun Industries has engaged in fraudulent business practices, deceiving investors, and failing to report key financial transactions." Nathan tilted his head slightly, feigning interest. He already knew what was coming. Lansing's team had provided documents as evidence, but Nathan had cross-checked them with public records the night before. Something wasn't right. As Lansing continued his well-rehearsed speech, Nathan's fingers tapped lightly on the table. Then, with perfect timing, he leaned over to the microphone and dropped a bombshell. "Objection, Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The prosecution is building a case on falsified evidence." A stunned silence filled the room. Judge Monroe's amused expression turned serious. "Excuse me?" Nathan smirked. "Game on." The room froze. Even though this was a mock trial, Nathan's words hit like a real courtroom bombshell. The law students, attorneys, and spectators turned to him, eyes wide. Lansing frowned. "Excuse me?" Nathan leaned forward, hands clasped together like a seasoned lawyer. "I said the prosecution's evidence is falsified." He gestured toward the thick folder of documents in front of Lansing. Specifically, Exhibit B, the financial audit that supposedly proves Calhoun Industries was involved in fraudulent transactions. Judge Monroe narrowed her eyes. "Mr. Cross, this is a mock trial, not a real case. Are you suggesting the materials provided by Preston and Carter are fake?" Nathan nodded. "Not just fake, Your Honor. Deliberately altered. And I can prove it." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lansing's confidence flickered, but he quickly composed himself. "That's ridiculous. These are the same documents we submitted to the real courts in the actual lawsuit against Calhoun Industries." Nathan smiled. "Exactly. And that's the problem." Lansing blinked. "What?" Nathan reached into his bag, pulling out a printed report. "I spent last night comparing your evidence with the publicly available financial records of Calhoun Industries. Your numbers don't match, not even close." He walked to the judge's bench, handing her a copy. "Look here, Your Honor. This is Preston and Carter's audit report." He flipped a page. "And this is the official SEC filing from Calhoun Industries. The prosecution's report claims a $4.2 million offshore transfer was hidden from investors." He turned the page. "But according to the SEC's database, that transaction never happened. It was fabricated." The gallery gasped. Lansing's face drained of color. This is a misunderstanding." Nathan smirked. "Is it?" Judge Monroe's eyes darkened. "Mr. Lansing, are you telling me that Preston and Carter submitted fraudulent evidence in an actual lawsuit?" Lansing's mouth opened, then closed. His co-counsel whispered furiously in his ear, but the damage was already done. Nathan crossed his arms. Seems like someone's been playing dirty, and you didn't expect a kid to catch it. The courtroom was no longer treating this like a school exercise. This had just become real, and Nathan Cross had just cracked open a scandal. Lansing shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his once confident smirk completely gone. His co-counsel flipped through their documents as if desperately trying to find an escape hatch. Judge Monroe glanced between Nathan and the prosecution. Her voice, once relaxed, was now sharp. "Mr. Lansing, this is a serious accusation. If Mr. Cross is correct, then Preston and Carter LLP knowingly submitted fabricated evidence to a real court of law." Lansing cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I believe there must be a mistake. We only used the documents provided by—" He stopped himself, but Nathan caught it. He narrowed his eyes. "Go on, Mr. Lansing. Provided by who?" Silence. Nathan leaned back, his confidence growing. "That's what I thought." He turned to the jury, mostly law students observing the mock trial, and drove the knife deeper. "You see, this isn't just a case of sloppy paperwork. This is about power. Preston and Carter is one of the biggest firms in the state, handling millions of dollars in high-stakes litigation. And now, we have proof that they're willing to manufacture evidence to win cases." A hushed wave of whispers filled the room. This was no longer a mock trial. This was a public scandal unfolding in real time. Judge Monroe set the fraudulent document down with deliberate care. "Mr. Lansing," she said, her voice icy, "I suggest you start talking. Now." Lansing's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, I wasn't personally involved in the preparation of these documents. I was simply given these files as part of my firm's strategy." Nathan smirked. "So you're saying someone higher up orchestrated this?" Lansing froze. He realized too late what he had just admitted. Judge Monroe turned to the bailiff. "Contact the State Bar Association. I want a formal review of these documents immediately. And I want the senior partners of Preston and Carter LLP in my chambers by the end of the day." Nathan clasped his hands together, looking straight at Lansing. "Looks like your bosses are about to have a very bad day." Lansing slumped back in his chair. He knew it. Nathan had just exposed a giant. The weight of Nathan's revelation hung heavy in the air. This was no longer about a mock trial. Judge Monroe's face was unreadable, but the way her fingers tapped against the bench spoke volumes. "Mr. Lansing," she said, her tone razor-sharp, "I'll ask you again. Who provided these falsified documents?" Lansing swallowed hard. His legal career, one he had spent years building, was crumbling in front of a teenager. He hesitated, glancing toward the doors of the courtroom, as if debating whether to bolt. Nathan didn't give him the chance. "You know what happens next, don't you?" he said, tilting his head. "Your firm is going to hang you out to dry. They'll protect themselves first." Lansing exhaled sharply. He knew Nathan was right. Slowly, with the whole room watching, he reached for his briefcase and pulled out a sealed manila folder. He hesitated, then slid it across the table. Judge Monroe motioned to the bailiff. "Bring that to me." The bailiff picked it up and handed it to the judge. She opened it. The moment her eyes scanned the first page, her lips pressed into a thin line. The tension was suffocating. She turned to Lansing. "This is a sworn affidavit from a former Preston and Carter employee." Her gaze darkened. "It claims that your firm has engaged in at least 6 cases of evidence tampering in the past 3 years. Gasps filled the room. Nathan's grip tightened on the defense table. 6 cases. This wasn't just one act of corruption. This was systemic. Judge Monroe turned to Lansing, her voice slow and deliberate. "Are these allegations true?" Lansing didn't move. Then finally, he nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The room exploded in murmurs. Nathan watched, his heart pounding. He had set out to win a mock trial, but instead he had exposed a real-life legal conspiracy. Judge Monroe sighed, rubbing her temple. Then she turned to Nathan. "Mr. Cross, I don't think you realize what you've just done." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe you should explain it to me." She studied him for a moment. Then, with the kind of look reserved for people who had just changed the course of history, she said, "You just took down one of the most powerful law firms in the country." Nathan Cross had always been good at solving puzzles, but he had never imagined he'd be at the center of one this big. The courtroom erupted with chaos. Reporters who had originally come to cover a high school mock trial were now furiously typing on their laptops, some already on their phones, breaking the biggest legal scandal of the year. Judge Monroe lifted her gavel. Bang, bang. "Order in the court," she commanded. The murmurs died down. She turned back to Lansing, who now looked like a man on the verge of collapse. "Mr. Lansing," she said, her voice laced with authority, "you've just admitted in open court that Preston and Carter has falsified evidence in multiple real cases. Do you understand the consequences of that?" Lansing nodded slowly, defeated. "Yes, Your Honor." Nathan leaned in, his sharp eyes fixed on the disgraced attorney. "And let me guess, if we pull records from those cases, we'll find similar altered evidence, won't we?" Lansing hesitated. Then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. The room gasped again. Judge Monroe's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned to the bailiff. "Notify the district attorney's office. I want an immediate review of every case Preston and Carter has handled in the last 5 years." Nathan crossed his arms. This was bigger than he had thought. Lansing, still gripping the table, looked at him. "You don't understand, kid," he muttered. "You just made some very dangerous enemies." Nathan smirked. "Then I guess they'll have to deal with me in open court." Judge Monroe glanced at Nathan, her expression unreadable. This 16-year-old had just cracked open one of the biggest legal scandals in the country, and he wasn't even a lawyer yet. She sighed, then looked at the gallery. "This court is adjourned," she said. "For now." Nathan exhaled, the adrenaline finally hitting him. He had walked into a mock trial, and walked out having exposed a billion-dollar law firm. And something told him this wasn't over. Nathan Cross stepped out of the courthouse into a storm of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. The mock trial had ended hours ago, but the real-world consequences were just beginning. He had come here expecting to argue a hypothetical case. Instead, he had exposed one of the biggest legal scandals in years. A journalist shoved a microphone toward him. "Nathan, did you know you were about to take down one of the most powerful law firms in the country?" Another reporter cut in. "How does it feel to be the 16-year-old who exposed Preston and Carter LLP?" Nathan adjusted his tie, the same borrowed one from his dad. He smirked. "I just followed the evidence. The law did the rest." Across the street, Lansing was being escorted into a black car, his career in ruins. And just behind him, Nathan spotted 2 men in expensive suits watching from a distance, senior partners from Preston and Carter, the real villains. Their expressions weren't angry, they were calculating. This wasn't over. Nathan exhaled. He had made powerful enemies today. But then, a voice called out from behind him. "Mr. Cross." He turned to see Judge Monroe approaching, her hands clasped behind her back. The reporters parted for her, sensing the moment was important. She stopped in front of him, studying him with an unreadable expression. Then finally she spoke. "You have an extraordinary mind, Nathan." He chuckled. "Tell that to my history teacher." She didn't laugh. Instead, she nodded toward the courthouse. "I've been on the bench for 30 years. I've seen some of the brightest young legal minds come and go. But I have never seen a 16-year-old take down a law firm in a mock trial." Nathan shrugged. "Guess I just got lucky." Judge Monroe narrowed her eyes. "Number what you have isn't luck." She paused, then said, "You ever thought about becoming a lawyer?" Nathan smirked. "I'm starting to." She smiled. "Good, because this courtroom is going to need someone like you." Nathan glanced back at the courthouse, then at the men from Preston and Carter still watching from the shadows. Something told him this was only the beginning, and for the first time, he knew exactly what he was meant to do.